Not everyone is naturally gifted in parenting. In the world of parenthood, not everyone has a natural talent. Parenting is a special calling that is not given to everyone. There are stories that make one pause and reflect. Why do some people have children if they are incapable of being true parents? This narrative is an example of a tragic reality that strikes with its painful truth and the complexity of human destinies. The main characters of this story are Elizabeth and Logan McWare, a young married couple from Tampa, Arizona. She was 23, and he was 25. On the surface, they seemed like a perfect couple, attractive, young, happy. However, behind this beautiful exterior lay a deep psychological trauma that would forever change their lives. The roots of Elizabeth's problems reached back to her childhood, a time marked by the harsh reality of a dysfunctional family. Her parents suffered from a severe addiction to prohibited substances. The girl grew up in terrible conditions, essentially in a home that resembled a den, where the parents were unable to provide even the most basic needs of a child. Tragedies pursued Elizabeth from early childhood. Her mother died by drowning due to an losing consciousness in the water under the influence of. Her father, in an equally unfit state, could not save his wife. A few years later, he also died from severe liver diseases caused by destructive addiction. Little Elizabeth, who had just learned her first words, was sent to an orphanage. A difficult period of constant moves between foster families began. By the age of 10, the girl had been returned to the orphanage 5 times. All these upheavals and years of loneliness painfully affected her psyche, causing serious behavioral problems. Acquaintances characterized Elizabeth as an emotionally immature personality. She was incredibly trusting and simultaneously overwhelmed with fear of being abandoned again. These deep psychological traumas caused uncontrollable jealousy towards her boyfriend Logan and an inability to control her own emotions. Internal tension constantly provoked conflicts in their relationship. The worst manifestation of her emotional instability was outbursts of physical aggression. Elizabeth could unexpectedly attack Logan, and her infantile character prevented her from recognizing the danger of her own actions. Despite this, Logan was in love and hoped that marriage would help calm the girl down. Unfortunately, marriage did not bring the expected changes. There were horrifying incidents, such as during a picnic when Elizabeth pushed Logan almost into the campfire, resulting in minor burns. Outside of such moments, they looked like a happy couple, which completely surprised those around them. An unexpected turn came with pregnancy. Initially, the young people did not plan to have a child, but Elizabeth decided to give birth. On May 3, 2009, a boy named Gabriel was born. Motherhood, however, did not bring the expected maturity to the young woman. The infant turned out to be extremely fussy. Constant crying irritated Elizabeth, provoking new outbursts of anger. Logan tried to maintain family balance, essentially remaining the only adult in these relationships. It seemed that the family was balancing on the edge of a complete emotional collapse. This story is a painful testament that parenthood is not simply a biological process. It is an extremely complex responsibility that requires inner maturity, emotional stability, and a deep understanding of parental duty. During those times, Logan made incredible efforts to provide for his young family. Work consumed almost all of his time, which meant the man could not always be close to his wife and son. Despite difficult circumstances, he tried to support his wife maximally and help in child rearing, especially paying attention during the most challenging moments. The family atmosphere was far from ideal. Elizabeth, in addition to her previously characteristic emotional explosiveness, became even more unstable after childbirth. Constant infant crying and her own emotional exhaustion led to her ability to attack her husband over the slightest trifle. Motherhood, instead of adding confidence, instead exacerbated her internal fears and traumas. The most destructive aspect was that Elizabeth began to be jealous of her own husband towards their son. She believed that Logan was paying too much attention to the child, and this incredibly irritated her. The fear of loneliness and constant panic attacks transformed the young mother into a person who was losing control of herself. Elizabeth's behavior during emotional outbursts became increasingly aggressive. She developed a habit of destroying everything around her. She could break household appliances, dishes, furniture. On one occasion, the woman even grabbed a kitchen knife and began cutting the sofa and her son's bed, which ultimately terrified Logan. It was extremely difficult for the young father to endure such psychological tension. He constantly balanced between the desire to be close to the child, the need to work, and the awareness that he could no longer tolerate his wife's emotional violence. Logan understood that their relationship had reached a dead end and required radical changes. Eventually, the man decided to divorce. Together with his son, he moved away from Elizabeth, which finally destroyed the already fragile psychological balance of the woman. Instead of analyzing her own behavior, she immediately accused her husband of betrayal and contempt. The most destructive in Elizabeth's behavior were threats to give the child up for adoption. Logan categorically opposed such actions, insisting that he was capable of raising his son independently. For his ex-wife, these threats became an instrument of psychological pressure and manipulation. Consultations with a lawyer helped clarify that Elizabeth could not simply deprive Logan of parental rights. The law stipulated that in case of disagreement by the biological father, custody issues would be resolved exclusively through court proceedings. Despite the possibility of transferring full custody to the husband, the woman consciously refused, driven by a desire for revenge. The divorce occurred, and joint custody was initially assigned. However, due to Elizabeth's constant emotional instability, Logan decided to seek sole custody. Temporarily, the boy remained living with his father, and the mother could see her son by prior arrangement. At first, it seemed that separation from the child would benefit Elizabeth. She calmed down somewhat. However, no one knew exactly what was happening in her home and mind. Christmas of 2009 was approaching. Gabriel had just turned 7 months old. Logan planned to spend the holidays with his family, hoping for shared bright moments, photographs with Santa Claus, first Christmas gifts for his son. But fate was preparing an entirely different scenario. On December 18, 2009, Logan was supposed to pick up his son after lunch, around 4 p.m. Arriving at his ex-wife's address, the man discovered a strange scene: closed doors, Elizabeth's car absent. This was unusual, as they had always precisely agreed on child transfer. Looking through the bedroom window, Logan saw a horrifying picture: pulled out and empty furniture drawers. A terrible assumption arose that his wife had unexpectedly disappeared with their son. Immediately contacting the police, he received a formal refusal, since the biological mother was a legal guardian. The following days passed in anxious waiting. It was impossible to establish any contact with Elizabeth. The situation was complicated by the complete absence of her social circle. There were almost no relatives or friends who could help in the search. The sense of impending disaster became increasingly obvious, but no one could predict what would happen next. The story that unfolded was extraordinarily complex and dramatic for 24-year-old Elizabeth. Her situation was complicated by the fact that she was essentially left alone with her problems. Logan, her ex-husband and the father of their shared child, was the only person who showed genuine interest in searching for and clarifying the circumstances. Despite the turbulent nature of the couple's relationship and Elizabeth's emotional instability, law enforcement essentially ignored Logan's appeals. The man repeatedly tried to draw the police's attention to the potential danger his ex-wife might pose to their 7-month-old son. However, his warnings were mostly disregarded by official structures. A fateful day came on December 27 when Logan received an unexpected message from an unknown number, the content of which immediately made it clear that Elizabeth was the author. In a short but extremely emotional message, she claimed that her ex-husband would never find his beloved Gabriel. The woman announced an urgent departure from the country and hinted that she would send the child's coordinates, unless the garbage truck arrives first. The confession was shocking. Elizabeth claimed that she had suffocated the infant, with Logan's numerous infidelities being the cause in her mind. Hearing such words, the man could barely keep himself standing. He immediately began calling the provided number, and after several attempts, finally connected to the conversation. Logan tried to convince his wife that she was lying, that the child was fine. However, Elizabeth consistently maintained the opposite. She claimed that she had killed their son and thrown his body in a diaper bag into a garbage container. After this horrific conversation, Logan immediately contacted law enforcement. To his great surprise, police officers again did not show appropriate seriousness to his statement. Only the next day did law enforcement intervene in the situation, as Elizabeth was supposed to be present at the final custody hearing for Gabriel, but, as expected, did not appear. Active searches began. Quite quickly, investigators traced her location to San Antonio, Texas. It turned out that immediately after moving to the new state, Elizabeth began actively seeking work and even passed an audition, intending to become a dancer at a nightclub. Her potential colleagues detailed the strange visitor to the investigators. They remembered Elizabeth coming to the audition alone, without a child. The girls unanimously noted her difficult, sometimes aggressive character, which immediately manifested during communication. Detectives discovered that Elizabeth had tried to get hired at 2 different night establishments. However, the subsequent circumstances of her stay remained a mystery. The girl never showed up for work at either club. Investigators meticulously tried to determine the exact moment when the woman was last with her child before that fatal call to her husband. It's important to note that she never sent any coordinates or addresses, as previously promised. Through careful verification of transportation routes, law enforcement established that on December 27, Elizabeth purchased a ticket for an interstate bus. Significantly, Gabriel was not on this route, and the mother was traveling from San Antonio to Florida. On December 29, police finally found the suspect in Miami. She was immediately arrested, after which intense interrogations began to determine the whereabouts of her son and the circumstances of the messages sent to her ex-husband. During interrogation, Elizabeth abruptly changed her previous version of events. Now she claimed that everything before was just a way to emotionally hurt Logan. According to her, she was actually heading to San Antonio because she had supposedly found a married couple who wanted to adopt Gabriel. The woman detailed a supposed 3-day interaction with potential adopters, during which she claimed to have been checking their integrity and ability to provide the child with proper conditions. Allegedly, at the end of the 3rd day, they met in a park where she handed Gabriel over to the new parents and left, intending to start a new life. However, gaps in her story immediately became apparent. For example, she couldn't recall the most elementary details about this couple: names, contacts, address. After brief reflection, Elizabeth could only remember the woman's name, supposedly Cheryl. She didn't provide the husband's first or last name at all, excusing herself by saying she didn't want to disturb them. This version looked entirely implausible. If she had supposedly spent 3 days with the couple and supposedly verified their reliability, how could she not know basic information about these people? Moreover, the logic of her actions was completely incomprehensible. Why steal a child from a father who wanted to raise him, search for unknown strangers, and do this outside the bounds of the law? The blatant absurdity and internal contradictions of her testimony only intensified law enforcement's suspicions and forced them to continue searching for the truth about little Gabriel's fate. That day, Eli had no answers to the important questions. Law enforcement officers, taking San Antonio with them, set out for the local landfill. Anticipating the worst, the search team enlisted specially trained dogs, as there was a possibility that Logan's previous call might contain a kernel of truth. Despite thorough searches, the child's body was never found, although the version about a possible murder still remained relevant. Law enforcement focused all their attention on searching for the mysterious couple who, according to the investigation, might have illegally taken the boy. Logan clung to this version as his last hope, sincerely hoping to see his son alive again someday. The man explained that a similar incident had occurred about 6 months earlier. At that time, his wife had gone to the airport with the child, apparently intending to start a new life. Fortunately, she did not manage to fly and ended up in the police station, as the boy's father immediately reported an attempted kidnapping. The protagonist of that story told a touching account of her experiences. While at the airport, she cried a lot, and it was there that she met a woman named Thames MIT, who was around 40 years old. Noticing the crying mother with a baby, Thames showed genuine compassion. Elizabeth shared her doubts about her own ability to be a good mother, and unexpectedly heard a question about the possibility of adoption. Initially, the woman categorically denied any thoughts of giving up the child. This immediately raised doubts about the truthfulness of her words regarding her desire to participate in the adoption process. In any case, after that meeting, Thames and Elizabeth became friends. In many aspects of life, they turned out to be incredibly similar. Both had complicated pasts. Thames had also worked as a dancer in a strip club and had once been simultaneously married to 2 men. Her greatest fear was being alone, and these experiences consistently destroyed her personal life and relationships with partners. Thames's biography was striking in its drama. 5 marriages, 3 children from different men, and not a single child remained with her. She had been stripped of parental rights, which was another painful blow to her life's aspirations. Unexpectedly, after 2001, a new stage began in her life. Thames realized a sincere desire to raise a child. Understanding that it was impossible to get her own children back and that she did not plan to give birth again, the woman turned to dubious adoption methods. The investigation showed that Thames did not stop at large-scale manipulations to achieve her goal. She deliberately adopted 2 children and constantly sought out young mothers in difficult life circumstances. Using social networks, she would persuade women to give up their children. Sometimes she would even approach strangers who were pregnant on the street, asking if they were planning to give up their child. After a long conversation with Thames, Elizabeth finally decided to give her child up for adoption. Her friend's candidacy seemed the most acceptable to her. At the same time, she did not want to act outside the law and decided to resort to trickery. Her ingenious plan involved forging Logan's signature on guardianship transfer documents. For this, she received $1,000 from Thames. When the biological father learned about the transaction, he immediately raised the alarm. Gabriel was removed from Thames's home and returned to his father. Thames herself claimed that she was unaware of the document forgery. Logan decided to completely deprive his ex-wife of parental rights, but the legal procedure dragged on for almost 6 months. This delay ultimately led to the mysterious disappearance of the boy. After her detention, Elizabeth launched a full-scale media campaign in her own defense. During the pre-trial period, she actively communicated with journalists, giving interviews and making loud statements. In every interview, the woman blamed Logan for all the problems. She insisted that if her husband had voluntarily allowed the adoption, nothing would have happened. According to her, there would have been no need to flee, to hide, and the procedure would have gone entirely officially, with known and accessible adoptive parents. Logan was in complete shock, unable to believe that Elizabeth had gone so far in her revenge, daring to take such an incredible action. During the custody proceedings, Logan repeatedly petitioned for sole custody of his son. In fact, he was already independently caring for the child, as Elizabeth showed no desire to be involved in raising him. She sought to get rid of the child, but the court unexpectedly ruled to maintain joint custody. The man tried to challenge this decision by all possible means but was forced to wait for the official court verdict. The biggest problem remained the complete lack of information about Gabriel's whereabouts. Several months passed, and Elizabeth was charged with a whole list of offenses, including falsifying adoption documents. However, the judicial system treated these crimes quite leniently. In particular, for forging a signature, the woman received only 30 days in prison. During this period, the custody trial was concluded, and the biological father finally obtained full parental rights. However, the fate of his son remained unknown. The investigation began to seriously consider the version of involvement of the black market of adoption. This version had a real foundation, as the city of San Antonio was considered a kind of center for illegal adoption operations. In such schemes, even lawyers were often involved, facilitating the procedure of transferring the child to potential parents. It should be noted that not all of the adoption market was of a criminal nature. Mostly, it involved quite decent families who sincerely wanted to have children but faced excessive bureaucratization of the official procedure. The main problem remained an almost complete lack of control over the child's subsequent fate. Elizabeth had enough time to establish contacts with organizations involved in the illegal movement of children. It is known that for a long time she lived in Maytel together with her son, but moved out from there already without him. Such actions fully fit into the typical practice of criminal groups that prefer to carry out such operations in inconspicuous places. The suspicions of the investigation were confirmed by San Antonio's strange biography. She had no relatives or even distant acquaintances. It seemed that her candidacy had been chosen quite deliberately. This unexpectedly confirmed Elizabeth's initial version, which she told during interrogation. It was quite possible that her true intention was to transfer the child to third parties. The main obstacle in the investigation was the colossal difficulties of social monitoring. The search for the baby was almost impossible. At the same time, the investigation collected many indirect pieces of evidence. In particular, after moving to San Antonio, she published a meaningful phrase on social networks: "If you want something, you will always find a way." Soon after, another post appeared about the beginning of a new life. Soon, Elizabeth demonstrated 2 luxurious diamond rings. Logan surely knew that she did not have money for such valuables before. Their value reached over $20,000. The woman claimed that these were gifts from admirers, but this version seemed extremely doubtful. However, these circumstances quite eloquently confirmed the version about the illegal sale of the son. After all, payment for such operations often occurs not in money, but in valuable items. During the investigation, detectives managed to find a girl who worked as an assistant to Elizabeth immediately after her arrival in San Antonio. The young woman took care of the baby for 2 days and was struck by the mother's indifference. Elizabeth was absolutely not interested in whether the child was hungry, tired, or wanted to sleep. The only thing she asked the assistant was to periodically give the child some medicine to keep him quiet and calm. Elizabeth wanted the child to be as quiet as possible, and the nature of the medicines she proposed to give remained a mystery. Presumably, these were some sedatives. At that moment, Elizabeth was in custody, and initial charges of kidnapping had been brought against her. The story of Elizabeth Johnson is a complex criminal puzzle that for decades did not give peace to law enforcement and the missing child's father. After the loud incident of her 7-month-old son's disappearance, the woman found herself at the epicenter of a judicial investigation that shocked the entire community. Initially, charges of child abduction were brought against Elizabeth, but these charges were quickly dropped. The legislation of the time allowed a mother to move freely around the country with her child, and at that moment, a joint custody agreement existed. Instead, the prosecution brought a more serious charge, creating a threat to the child's life. The court session lasted several days and ended unexpectedly. The jury found Elizabeth guilty, imposing a relatively mild sentence, 5 years and 3 months of imprisonment. This decision caused a huge resonance in society. Logan, Gabriel's father, was in shock that the woman who had effectively lost the child received such an insignificant punishment. The prosecution officially stated the complete absence of direct evidence of harm to the child or her murder. Elizabeth herself rejected her original version of events, which she had previously told Logan by phone. She insisted that she had given the child to an unknown couple, and her previous statements were only an attempt to anger her ex-husband. What infuriated Logan the most was that the charges of child abduction were even dropped, a crime for which she could have been sentenced to up to 24 years in prison. However, the authorities were powerless to change anything. During her imprisonment, detectives repeatedly tried to force Elizabeth to tell at least something about Gabriel's fate. However, the woman consistently maintained her line, complete silent non-involvement. She claimed that she knew nothing about the child's whereabouts and seemed absolutely indifferent to his fate. Especially suspicious was the fact that over all these years, Elizabeth never showed any desire to find potential adoptive parents or clarify the child's fate. Logan was almost certain that his son was no longer alive. An unexpected turn was a phone conversation between Elizabeth and an old friend named Thames. The recording of the conversation was extremely strange. It seemed that the women were rehearsing a prepared performance. Elizabeth tried to convince Thames of something, accusing her of ruining her life. In turn, Thames denied all allegations. Who was telling the truth remained unknown. In 2014, Elizabeth was released from prison with a 3-year probation period. However, she immediately began systematically violating the conditions, even moving to another state, New Mexico. This was a gross violation of probation rules. Soon she was arrested and brought back. Searches for Gabriel continued for years, but to no avail. Logan used all possible modern technologies, from DNA analysis to geolocation database studies. No results. Elizabeth's life continued. She changed several names, got married, and settled in New Mexico. In 2021, she became pregnant again, which caused a wave of outrage among those who knew her story. Logan and others were convinced that she did not deserve to be a mother after what happened to Gabriel. During interviews, Elizabeth claimed that the worst punishment for her was not knowing her son's fate. She assured that she regretted her actions and had improved. However, society did not believe her. Thames Smith was found guilty of document forgery and given a minimum sentence, 30 days in prison and 30 days of probation. Logan, despite creating his own family, still does not give up hope of finding his son. The fate of 7-month-old Gabriel remains an unresolved mystery, known perhaps only to his mother. The man hopes that one day Elizabeth will tell the truth about what really happened to the child. I look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe to the channel. Until next time, friends.